Before I get started, I'd like to ask that all of our mothers stand up. We'd like to honor you. Got a lot of moms in the house this morning. Let's give them a hand. You know, the little truth about it is, wouldn't a soul be here today if it wasn't for our moms?
Amen.
I mean, it's just that simple. Biologically speaking, there wouldn't be a soul here today if it wasn't for our mothers. So thank you to our wonderful mothers, grandmothers, and all the things that you have done. This morning, of course, we're talking about Mother's Day, but we're talking this morning about Mother's Day with a twist. See, mothers are important. But did you know that blood doesn't always make a mother? It's an unfortunate fact in our society. Mothers can be the most influential people in our lives, but in today's society there are many mothers that don't fulfill their duties and responsibilities as mothers. There are many women in our society today that are taking care of children that are not theirs. While we oftentimes remember birth mothers, biological mothers, sometimes we forget those mothers that choose to love children that are not their own. We do it with fathers a lot of times too. That's what I mean when I say blood doesn't always make a mother. It's love that makes a mother. Biological or otherwise. Now I, for one, personally fall into a dangerous statistic in our society where grandparents are having to raise their grandchildren. I thank God for the grandparents that are willing and that are able to step in and do what the parents aren't doing. Thank God for those grandparents. But it's not a necessity that we see them step in. And we need to understand it's not out of necessity that they do this. It's out of love. Just because there was a need for someone to raise me didn't mean that my grandparents had to be the ones that stepped in and did it. However, it was their love for me that they were willing. One of the things that reminds me the most when we come to Mother's Day and Father's Day is that my grandparents, my grandfather, and my grandmother were more than grandparents to me. They were mom and dad. And it's because of them and their love. And they never let me believe any different. They never once told me it was because we had to. It was always because we loved you. Thank God for people like that. They made sure that I understood that it was because of love. They loved me and they wanted me to have every opportunity in life to succeed. And it's because of their love that I am who I am today. It's because of their love that I am where I am today. Because without them, God only knows where I would be and the chances of life that I would have missed out. I share this today because we need to be thankful for these type of mothers and fathers who step in because of love, not need. Now, we're not taking anything away from the mothers that raise their children, from the mothers that love their children. Matter of fact, we're just adding to their number when we talk about these mothers, these grandmothers, these stepmothers, these adoptive mothers, foster mothers, and there's even some in-laws that choose to love children that are not their own. Because like Jesus, they have a heart for their children. They chose not because they had to, but because they want to love and raise a child that's not their own. To these people, we owe a special thank you. This morning, we're going to look at a biblical example of how that type of love can bind. We're going to look at how a mother-in-law became a mother and how a daughter-in-law responded. See, today we're going to look at one of the greatest books of love in the Bible. We're going to look at the relationship between Naomi and her daughter-in-law, Ruth. In Ruth chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, we read, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah." Well, that's a hard word to say. "They went to Moab to live there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. She was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband." What a spot she was in. What a spot these 2 young women found themselves in. Their father-in-law had died, who was the provider for the family, and their husbands died, and Naomi had lost her husband. Because of a famine, this man decided the best thing to do was to relocate his family to another country. The country was Moab. Now, because of their Jewish heritage, this had to be a difficult decision. They were going to have to move away from their inheritance, from the property that they owned, and move to a foreign country. While they were there, all 3 of the boys died, the father and the 2 sons. Now, according to the Jewish law, the children were responsible for caring for their parents, and after Elimelech died, that left the 2 boys to care for their mother, to meet their financial needs and care for their mother. Now, we're not told how old the 2 children were. But sometime during the time that they were there, the 2 boys married Moabite women, which was forbidden according to Jewish law. They weren't to intermarry, but they did anyway. Now, the writer of the book of Ruth doesn't tell us if they were only in the country for 10 years when they died, or if they had lived 10 years after the death of their father. It's not clear on that, but the boys died, left no one to care for their mother, no one to care for their wife. Naomi was left with no one to care for her, and to make matters worse, she was living in a foreign land that had no obligation to see that she was cared for. But she wasn't alone. She had 2 daughters-in-law with her. Now, for those that struggle with your in-laws, listen to this story. But they found themselves in the same position. No one to care for. Short period of time, these 3 women were mourning. Now, according to Jewish custom, a brother of a deceased was to marry the widows, and their firstborn would carry on the deceased brother's name and receive his inheritance. But there was a problem with that. See, Naomi was old. She wasn't going to have any more children. There was no one to carry on her husband's family line. So having no one to care for her, but she had some relatives back in Bethlehem, Naomi made a difficult decision to head home. Ruth chapter 1, continuing on in verse 7 through 11, says, "With her 2 daughter-in-laws, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dad and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud, and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husband?" See, this is where we start to get in to the heart of the story, where we begin to see the love that was shared among these 3 people. As they started heading towards Bethlehem, Naomi got the idea that these 2 daughters-in-law of hers didn't need to go. She wanted what was best for them. She wasn't worried about herself. Boy, doesn't this sound like a mother? She wasn't worried about herself. She didn't care the fact that she had nobody to take care of her if she sent these 2 women home. Nobody to help her through this long and difficult journey it was good to get back to her homeland. So instead of worrying about herself, she had the best interest of these 2 women at heart. She wanted them to go back home. She knew that since she wouldn't have any more children, they should return where they could remarry. They could have children. And they would be cared for the rest of their lives. She told them, "Go back home. Go back to your mothers." Because they had remained with her after their husbands had died, which again, they had no obligation to do so, she asked that God show kindness to them in finding another husband. It was now out of need, it was out of love that she tried to send these women back home. She loved them enough to let them go back home to their family, leaving her alone to fend for herself on a dangerous journey. However, they refused to go. See, sometimes children have the best interest of their parents at heart as well. And not only are mothers willing to sacrifice for their children, but many times children are willing to sacrifice for their mothers. She reminded them that there was no brothers to marry, no one to care for them, and encouraged them to continue to go back. But their love was mutual. They loved each other. They cared for each other. They wept together. Even the thought of being separated. This was a hard time in their lives. And mourning their losses just drew them closer together. Again, remember, this was a society where the daughter-in-law had no responsibility to their husband or to their husband's family after they died. But they remained with their mother-in-law. Our society is much like the society of Moab in this respect. So when a spouse dies, the remaining spouse has no legal responsibility to remain part of the in-law family, especially when there's no children or grandchildren involved. There's no law. There's no moral obligation for this to happen in our country. However, much like we see with Naomi and these 2 daughters, it's love that keeps many of these relationships connected. These women had no obligation and they had no reason to stay with Naomi. No reason except love. Her love for them and their love for her. You see, this helps us to understand that even though there may not be blood shared, love creates a strong bond. After Naomi continued urging them, one of them changed her mind and returned home. Verses 14 through 18, we read, At this they wept again. Then Ophrah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Well, see, at this point, one of them decides, okay, it's time to go back. We're not told why, we're not told what changed her mind, but she went back. But Ruth clung to her mother-in-law. Again, Naomi wanted what was best for these two. She knew the difficulties that they were going to face in Bethlehem. And even after the one left, she continued to urge Ruth to go back home. She knew that the Moabite gods were not the same as the God of Israel. She knew that the laws of Moab were different than those of Israel. She knew that Ruth would be considered an outsider. It would be treated as an outsider. She knew that Ruth may never be able to remarry in Bethlehem. She knew that Ruth would face many difficulties in her homeland, so she continued to urge her to go back. Go back. It wasn't because she wanted to be alone. It was because she wanted what was best for Ruth and wanted Ruth to have a full life. Now, when you read the story and you think about these things, it doesn't sound like a mother-in-law to me. Because most mother-in-laws would be like, bye, good riddance, see ya. You know, don't let the door hit you on the way out. But no, Naomi loved her daughter-in-law. She wanted what was best for her daughter-in-law. Now we get to look at Ruth. Her faith and her commitment to her mother-in-law. Her faith and her commitment to God. Ruth told Naomi, stop. Just stop right there. Don't tell me to go home again. I'm not going to do it. I love you. I care for you. I want to go with you. I will go wherever you go. I will accept your people as my people. I will accept the true God, the God of Israel, as my God. Ruth committed herself to Naomi. She even went as far as to call God to punish her if she went back on her word. That's serious love right there. Telling somebody that if I don't keep my commitments to you, I want God to punish me. This is an example of true love. This is an example of commitment where commitment isn't required and isn't even necessary. We began this morning by talking about people that are choosing to raise children that are not theirs. And they're not necessarily following Naomi's example, but more of Ruth's example of love and commitment, where love and commitment is not required, but it's given anyway. She decided to stay with Naomi, as many other people decide to raise and to love children that are not their own. Ruth is praised for her love and her commitment to her mother-in-law. The people that do these things for children that are not their own deserve to be praised for their love and commitment just as much as our birth mothers, as our biological mothers, as those that had mothers that loved them and raised them as their own because they were their own. Those that volunteer to do it, to raise other people's children, deserve just as much praise and honor as biological mothers. Same thing goes with dads, but dads, our month is next month. We'll talk about that next month. But Ruth chose to stay with her Naomi. With Naomi, as these people choose to be parents. Folks, if you don't know, it takes a special person to raise somebody else's child. It takes a special person to step in and do those things. I'm thankful for Ruth's story. I'm thankful for my story because I received that kind of love and commitment, where that kind of love and commitment wasn't required. There are many children in our society today who are thankful for that type of love and commitment. Children's lives are being changed today because of that type of love and commitment. When we are aware of people that make this choice, we need to thank them and we need to do whatever we can to support them. So Naomi gave up trying to convince Ruth to go back home. Because of Ruth's love and commitment, she was soon rewarded. See, Elimelech had a relative whose name was Boaz, who lived near where Ruth and Naomi settled when they returned home. Naomi encouraged Ruth to go to collect grain from his fields, and Boaz took to Ruth. There's something about her that he really liked. He invited her to stay with his servants and allowed her to take as much as she wanted from the fields. In Ruth chapter 2, verses 11 through 12, we read, Boaz replied, I've been told about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with people that you did not know. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. See, Boaz had heard Naomi's story. Because of her faith and her commitment to Naomi, Boaz asked God to bless Ruth. Boaz understood how deep her love for Naomi was because of what she had given up to remain with her mother-in-law. After this, as you continue to read the story, Naomi encouraged Ruth to present herself to Boaz in a way that would let him know that she wanted him to marry her. There was a term in the Jewish, I'm trying to remember the word here. In the Jewish society, there was a term used that was guardian redeemer. And Boaz had the right and the responsibility to continue the family line of Elimelech. According to the Jewish law, he was to marry Ruth. The first child would be that of Elimelech's, actually of his child, of his son, and would be Naomi's grandchild. Even though they weren't blood, it would still be her grandchild. Ruth's gesture, as we read of the story, was a reminder that Boaz had this responsibility. But there was someone that was a closer relative. So Boaz approached him with the option, but because he had his own responsibilities, he declined. At that point, Boaz claimed Elimelech's property as his own, as the Redeemer. In Ruth chapter 4, I know we're doing a lot of summarizing in this, but in Ruth chapter 4, verses 9 and 10 we read, Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, Today you are my witnesses, that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from the town records. Today you are my witnesses. See, because of Ruth's love and commitment to Naomi, God had blessed her with a new husband who loved her, was willing to marry her, and to continue Elimelech's family line. With the elders of the town as witnesses, Boaz approached the other person who was able to redeem Elimelech's property, and after he refused, Boaz was given the right, and he jumped right on it. He bought all of Elimelech's property and that of his son, which was their inheritance in Israel. And it was to give to the birth of his first child. Together with everything they owned came Ruth. Ruth, who was left to care for her mother-in-law, now had someone to care for her. Now she was able to continue the family line of her first husband. Because of her love and devotion to Naomi, Ruth was blessed. And because of her love and devotion to Ruth, Naomi was blessed. Continuing in chapter 4, verses 13 through 17, it says, So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed, and he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now Ruth is married, got someone to care for her, and she's blessed with a child. According to Jewish law, the firstborn of the Redeemer would be considered the child of the first husband. The child would have the responsibility of continuing the line of the first husband's family and would be responsible for caring for his family. This child was Naomi's grandson and would be responsible for Naomi's care. This was a blessing to Naomi and to Ruth. The women of Bethlehem praised God for Naomi's grandson. The child, though not her child, or even her grandchild by blood, would take care of Naomi. Not only that, Ruth was blessed. She was blessed to be the great-grandmother of David, who was the greatest king Israel ever had. And she's also blessed because she is in the family line of the Messiah, our Savior, Jesus Christ. Simply because she loved and was committed to her mother-in-law. She was blessed for her love and devotion to her mother-in-law. She was blessed for making a choice, not an obligation to love. Some of the greatest blessings that people receive when they do things out of love, not obligation. Because of love, my grandparents chose to raise me. Because of that, I'm here today. I dare not think, don't even want to know where I would be had it not been for them. We wouldn't have the story of Ruth if it wasn't for love and commitment. Because of the love that Naomi received from Ruth and Ruth received from Naomi, they were able to pass it on to another generation, and another generation, and many other generations after that. Because of the love that I received from my grandparents, I can pass it to my own children. It isn't always blood that makes a mother. It's always love. One 4-letter word makes a mother. Naomi loved Ruth, Because of that, Ruth loved Naomi. Because of Naomi's love for Ruth, Ruth decided to stay with her, to leave everything she had ever known, and to go to a strange land with a different set of moral laws and responsibilities. Because of their love and devotion to each other, they were both blessed. Ruth was blessed with a new husband and a child. Naomi was blessed with a grandchild. Many children in our society today are blessed because people choose to love them. Many people are blessed today because they choose to love a child that's not their own. Yes, this story revolves around Ruth, who was a daughter-in-law. But without the love that Naomi showed her daughter-in-law, Ruth probably would have turned her back like her other daughter-in-law. Without the love that Naomi showed Ruth, we wouldn't even have the story to be talking about today. The story of Ruth gives us an example of how the love of a mother can change the lives of children. The story of Ruth reminds us of how love and devotion are more important than blood relations. The story of Ruth is a story of love and a story of blessing. Today, on this Mother's Day 2017, we applaud mothers. We applaud the mothers that raise and love their children. We applaud the mothers that choose to raise and to love children that are not their own. We applaud the grandmothers that choose to raise and to love their grandchildren. We applaud the mothers that love and care for children, teaching their children how to show love to others. We applaud the mothers that are setting the example for other mothers. We applaud the mothers that raise their daughters to be good mothers. And we applaud the mothers that raise their sons to be good fathers. And yes, we even applaud mother-in-laws. This morning we applaud all mothers, blood mothers, and those that choose to be mothers. And let me tell you, in our society today, there are still many, many children that don't know the love of a mother. There are many, many children out there in our own state that don't know the love of a mother. We need to thank those mothers that are willing to take children that are not their own, love them and care for them, because it is making a world of difference in their lives. It isn't blood that makes a mother, but it's always love. Thank you to all of our mothers.